An exhausted father, down to his last $12, risked everything to protect a stranger in a coffee shop. He thought he was saving a struggling woman from a public breakdown. He didn't know the woman in the stained sweater owned half the city, and she never forgot a face. The Seattle rain was unforgiving that Tuesday morning, a relentless, icy drizzle that seemed to seep straight into Romano Pendleton's bones. At 34, Romano looked a decade older. The deep creases around his eyes and the permanent tension in his shoulders were the physical receipts of 3 years of relentless hardship. Since his wife, Sarah, passed away from ovarian cancer at Swedish Medical Center, Romano had been locked in a losing battle against medical debt, a crumbling job market, and the terrifying responsibility of raising their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, entirely alone. After dropping Lily off at her elementary school in Queen Anne, Romano sought a brief refuge before heading to another humiliating job interview. He ducked into Beacon Hill Roasters, a small, independent coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans, damp wool, and cinnamon. It was a modest luxury. Checking his Chase Bank app on his cracked smartphone, Romano grimaced. His available balance was exactly $12.45. He could afford one black drip coffee. The shop was crowded with morning commuters, shaking off umbrellas and aggressively checking their watches. Romano stood near the back of the line, his damp trench coat heavy on his shoulders. That was when the shouting started. "Are you completely blind? Or just stupid?" The voice was a booming, arrogant baritone that instantly silenced the low hum of the cafe. Romano looked up. Standing near the pickup counter was a man in his late 40s, wearing a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that screamed Wall Street finance. His face was flushed red with aristocratic rage. The target of his fury was a woman who looked entirely out of place in the upscale neighborhood. She wore a faded, oversized gray cardigan that had seen better days, plain black leggings, and scuffed sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a messy, uneven bun. She looked utterly exhausted, holding a damp napkin. I stepped back to let someone pass," the woman said. Her voice was quiet, almost entirely devoid of emotion, which only seemed to enrage the man further. "You ruined a $4,000 suit, you clumsy idiot," the man barked, pointing violently at a small brown coffee stain near his left lapel. He took a threatening step forward, looming over her. "Look at you. You probably couldn't pay for dry cleaning if you worked for a month. People like you shouldn't even be allowed in establishments like this." The barista behind the counter looked panicked, frozen with a pitcher of milk in hand. The other patrons awkwardly averted their eyes, prioritizing their own comfort over the unfolding abuse. A familiar heat flared in Romano's chest. It was the same protective instinct he felt whenever the world threatened Lily. He didn't care about the man's suit or the unspoken social hierarchies of Seattle's elite. He cared that a bully was publicly humiliating a woman who looked like she was already carrying the weight of the world. Romano stepped out of the line. He walked deliberately across the tiled floor, placing himself squarely between the enraged executive and the quiet woman in the gray cardigan. At 6'2", with the broad shoulders of a former construction architect, Romano was an imposing physical barrier. "I think she apologized," Romano said, his voice calm, steady, and dangerously low. The man in the suit blinked, momentarily taken aback by the intervention. He looked Romano up and down, taking in the frayed cuffs of Romano's coat and his scuffed boots. He sneered. "And who the hell are you? Her husband? Keep your wife on a leash. She just ruined my morning." "It was an accident," Romano replied, not moving an inch. "And you're causing a scene over a stain that will come out with cold water and club soda. Now, you're gonna back away, turn around, and walk out that door before I decide to give you a reason to actually be upset." The executive's jaw tightened. He puffed his chest out, trying to reclaim his dominance. But Romano didn't blink. There was a raw, hollowed-out look in Romano's eyes, the look of a man who had already lost everything that mattered and had absolutely nothing to fear from a loudmouth in a designer suit. After a tense, heavy silence, the executive scoffed, straightened his tie, and muttered a string of curses. "Trash defending trash," he spat, before aggressively pushing his way out the glass doors, the bell jingling cheerfully in his wake. Romano let out a slow breath, feeling the adrenaline recede, leaving a cold sweat in its wake. He turned to the woman. Up close, he noticed she had striking, piercing blue eyes that seemed sharply at odds with her disheveled appearance. She was staring at him, studying his face with an unsettling intensity. "Are you okay?" Romano asked gently, softening his posture. "Yes," she said quietly. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Nobody deserves to be spoken to like that," Romano said. He glanced at the spilled coffee on the floor and the empty cup in her hand. "Did you lose your drink?" "I did. And unfortunately, I left my wallet at home. She looked down, a flicker of genuine embarrassment crossing her face. Romano thought of the $12.45 in his account. He thought of the eviction warning sitting on his kitchen counter from Oak Tree Property Management. Then he looked at the woman, whose hands were trembling slightly, whether from the cold or the confrontation, he couldn't tell. "Come on," Romano said, nodding toward the counter. "I've got it." "No, really, I couldn't ask you to." "I insist," Romano smiled, a genuine tired smile. He walked to the register, one large dark roast, and whatever she was having. "A vanilla latte," she said softly, stepping up beside him, "and a blueberry muffin, if it's not too much." Romano swallowed hard but kept his smile steady. "Add the muffin, Chloe," he told the barista. He swiped his debit card. The machine beeped, flashing approved. His phone buzzed in his pocket immediately. A notification from Chase. "Your available balance is $1.30. He handed the woman her coffee and the pastry bag. "Here you go. Have a better morning." "What's your name?" she asked, clutching the warm cup like a lifeline. Romano Pendleton." She extended a hand. "Claire." Her grip was surprisingly firm for someone who looked so frail. "Well, Claire, keep your head up out there. The world is full of loud people. Doesn't mean you have to listen to them." With a final nod, Romano walked out into the freezing rain, entirely unaware that the woman he had just spent his last dollars on was Claire Montgomery, the ruthless, visionary billionaire CEO of Montgomery Holdings, the largest real estate development conglomerate in the Pacific Northwest. The next 48 hours pushed Romano to the absolute brink. He returned to his cramped two-bedroom apartment in Ballard, completely soaked. On the kitchen island, pinned under a ceramic mug, was a bright pink notice. Final warning. Eviction proceedings initiated. He owed 3 months of back rent. If he didn't secure $4,000 by Friday, he and Lily would be out on the street. Romano had spent the last 2 years taking whatever freelance drafting and contracting gigs he could find, but the local housing market had stalled and his contacts had dried up. He had once been a senior project architect for a respected firm, but taking 6 months off to hold Sarah's hand through chemotherapy had cost him his position. The corporate world didn't care about grief. It only cared about billable hours. That evening, he sat on the edge of Lily's bed, reading her Charlotte's Web until her breathing evened out into the soft rhythms of sleep. He brushed a stray curl from her forehead. She had Sarah's nose and Sarah's laugh. "I won't let us fall, little bug," he whispered into the dark room. "I promise." The next morning, Thursday, Romano was sitting at his microscopic kitchen table, desperately scrolling through Craigslist for day laborer jobs, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar downtown Seattle number. "Hello? Romano Pendleton?" The voice was a woman's, brisk and fiercely professional. "Speaking. My name is Catherine Lewis. I'm an executive recruiter representing Montgomery Holdings. We are currently searching for a senior director of project management for a massive upcoming waterfront development. Your portfolio crossed my desk this morning, and we would like to bring you in for an immediate interview at noon today." Romano nearly dropped the phone. Montgomery Holdings? They were titans. They built skyscrapers, luxury complexes, and entire commercial districts. I'm sorry, my portfolio crossed your desk? I haven't applied to Montgomery in over 3 years. Our talent acquisition methods are highly proactive, Mr. Pendleton, Catherine replied smoothly. Can we expect you at noon? The Montgomery Tower on 5th Avenue, 42nd floor. Yes, Romano said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Yes, absolutely. I'll be there. He hung up, his hands shaking. He didn't question the miracle. He couldn't afford to. He pulled his only surviving suit from the back of the closet, a dark navy wool blend he had worn to Sarah's funeral. It was slightly too loose on him now, hanging off his thinned-out frame, but he ironed it meticulously, polished his black Oxfords, and kissed Lily goodbye as his neighbor, Mrs. Gable came over to watch her. By 11:45 a.m., Romano was standing in the cavernous white marble lobby of Montgomery Tower. The sheer scale of the wealth on display was suffocating. Abstract sculptures that likely cost more than Romano would earn in a lifetime decorated the atrium. Security guards in tailored suits checked his ID before granting him elevator access. The 42nd floor was a maze of frosted glass and brushed steel. A receptionist pointed him toward a severe, windowless conference room. 10 minutes later, the door swung open, and a man walked in carrying a sleek tablet. Mr. Pendleton, the man said, not offering a hand. He was in his late 30s, with slicked-back blonde hair and a sharp, predatory face. I am Derek Mercer, Vice President of Regional Development. Let's make this quick. I have a tea time at 3. Mercer sat down, flicked his finger across the tablet, and sighed heavily. I'll be honest, Pendleton. I have absolutely no idea why Human Resources flagged your file. You haven't managed a project of scale in over 36 months. Your last consistent employment ended abruptly, and you've been scraping by doing what? Bathroom remodels for suburbanites? Romano swallowed his pride. My wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer, Mr. Mercer. I stepped away to care for her. Prior to that, I lead the design and structural execution of the Rainier Plaza expansion. Sympathy doesn't pour concrete, Pendleton, Mercer said coldly, not looking up from the screen. Montgomery Holdings is currently launching the Bainbridge Waterfront Initiative. It's a $400 million undertaking. We need sharks. We need killers. We need people who live and breathe the bottom line. Looking at you, Mercer finally looked up, his eyes sweeping over Romano's slightly frayed suit lapels. I see a guy who got soft. I don't see a Montgomery man. Anger, cold and sharp, pierced through Romano's desperation. He thought of Lily. He thought of the pink eviction notice. He thought of the arrogance of men like Mercer, who sat in glass towers and treated human lives like rounding errors. You're right, Romano said, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the glass table. I'm not a shark. I don't care about your golf game, and I don't use corporate buzzwords to make myself feel important. But I know structural engineering better than anyone in this building. I know how to bring a project in under budget without cutting corners on safety. And I know the value of hard work because I've had to fight for every single inch of ground I stand on. If you want a killer, hire a mercenary. If you want this waterfront project built flawlessly, you hire me. Mercer stared at him, his lips curling into a condescending smirk. He opened his mouth to deliver what would undoubtedly be a withering rejection. Before Mercer could speak, the heavy oak door of the conference room clicked open. A woman stood in the doorway. She was wearing an immaculately tailored black Armani suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek, severe twist. She radiated absolute, terrifying authority. It was the executive assistant. Mr. Mercer, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. The CEO would like to see Mr. Pendleton in her office. Immediately. Mercer's face drained of color. The CEO? Miss Montgomery? There must be a mistake. I am handling this interview, and I was just about to conclude. It wasn't a request, Derek, the assistant said, her gaze entirely devoid of warmth. She turned her eyes to Romano. Mr. Pendleton, please, follow me. Romano stood up, his mind spinning. He left Mercer sitting at the table, looking as though he had just been slapped. The assistant led Romano into a private elevator tucked away at the end of a heavily guarded corridor. She inserted a biometric key, and the elevator surged upward with a silent, breathless speed. Floor 50, the automated voice chimed. The doors parted, revealing a space that was less an office and more a modern art museum suspended in the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a staggering, unobstructed 360-degree view of the Seattle skyline, the gray waters of the Puget Sound, and the distant, snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier. At the far end of the room, behind a massive desk carved from a single slab of reclaimed walnut, stood a woman looking out at the rain. Miss Montgomery, the assistant said quietly, Mr. Pendleton is here. Thank you, Sarah. That will be all, the woman replied without turning around. The heavy doors closed behind Romano, leaving him alone in the cavernous room. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, hyper-aware of his cheap suit and scuffed shoes against the plush, imported rug. Mr. Pendleton, the CEO said, finally turning around. Romano's breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to violently tilt on its axis. It was her, the woman from Beacon Hill Roasters. Gone was the oversized, stained gray cardigan. Gone were the scuffed sneakers and the look of hollow exhaustion. She was dressed in a sharp, slate gray blazer over a silk blouse, a diamond necklace resting subtly at her collarbone. The messy bun was gone, replaced by perfectly styled, shoulder-length waves, but the piercing blue eyes were exactly the same. Claire, Romano whispered, completely forgetting the professionalism of the moment. Claire Montgomery, she corrected gently, walking around the massive desk. A small, knowing smile played at the corners of her mouth. Please, Romano, take a seat. Romano didn't move. I don't understand. The coffee shop. The man shouting at you. You said you forgot your wallet. I did forget my wallet, Claire said, gesturing to the leather chairs opposite her desk. She sat down, leaning back, and my security detail, and my phone. Tuesday morning was difficult. We are currently navigating a hostile internal restructuring. My board of directors has been trying to force me out of the company my grandfather built. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I just wanted a quiet cup of coffee away from the vipers in this building. I slipped out the freight elevator. She paused, her eyes locking onto his. When Richard Keaton, that was the loudmouth in the suit, by the way, he runs a rival hedge fund, began screaming at me, I was prepared to simply take it. I was too exhausted to fight. I am used to men shouting to get their way. But then you stepped in. Romano sank slowly into the leather chair, his mind struggling to process the revelation. You brought me here. I did, Claire nodded. I had my security team run your name through the city databases. I know about Sarah. I'm incredibly sorry for your loss. I know about Lily. And I know about the eviction notice from Oak Tree Property Management, which, ironically, is a subsidiary of this company. Romano stiffened, a flash of defensive anger cutting through his shock. Did you bring me up here to play some kind of billionaire charity game, Miss Montgomery? Because I don't need pity. I don't do charity, Romano. Claire's voice hardened, the CEO persona snapping back into place. I do business. When I researched you, I didn't just look at your bank account. I looked at your architectural records. Your work on Rainier Plaza was brilliant. You are overqualified for the roles you've been applying for. But more importantly, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. I saw a man who had exactly $12 to his name facing homelessness who chose to spend 7 of those dollars feeding a stranger just because she was having a bad day. I saw a man who stood up to wealth and arrogance without a second thought. Integrity is the rarest currency in this building, Romano. And I need someone with integrity. Need them for what? Romano asked cautiously. The Bainbridge Waterfront Initiative, Claire stated. It's my legacy project. But I know for a fact that someone in my upper management is taking kickbacks and intentionally inflating supplier contracts to sabotage the budget. The board wants the project to fail, so they can oust me in the next shareholder meeting. I suspect Derek Mercer is the leak, but I can't prove it. Mercer, Romano muttered. He interviewed me downstairs. He told me I wasn't a shark. Mercer is a parasite, Claire said sharply. I am hiring you as the Senior Director of Project Management, effective immediately. Your salary will be $250,000 a year, plus performance bonuses. I will personally clear your back rent today. Your job is to take over the Bainbridge project, review every single contract Mercer has signed, and build the development exactly to spec. You answer to no one but me. Romano sat in stunned silence. The numbers echoed in his head. 250,000. Lily could go to the private school down the street. They could keep the apartment. They could breathe. Why me? Romano asked softly. You could hire auditors, investigators. Because auditors can be bought, Claire said, her blue eyes intense. You can't. You proved that on Tuesday. So, Mr. Pendleton, do we have a deal? Yes, Romano breathed. Yes, Miss Montgomery. Good, Claire smiled. Welcome to the war room, Romano. The euphoria lasted exactly 24 hours. By Friday afternoon, Romano was sitting in his new glass-walled office on the 40th floor, surrounded by towering stacks of blueprints and financial ledgers. He had spent the morning deep diving into the concrete supplier contracts Mercer had approved. Claire's suspicions were entirely correct. The concrete was being billed at a 30% markup through a shell company registered in Delaware. Romano reached for his desk phone to call Claire's office. But before he could lift the receiver, his door clicked shut. Derek Mercer stood in the office, his face a mask of cold, concentrated malice. He didn't sit down. He walked over to the blinds, twisting the plastic rod so the slats snapped shut, blocking the view of the bullpen outside. I don't know who you're sleeping with or what blackmail you have on Claire Montgomery to leapfrog over 30 qualified executives, Mercer said, his voice a venomous whisper. I'm doing my job, Mercer, Romano said, standing up, matching the VP's height, which is more than I can say for whoever approved the Pacific Coast Concrete contract. Care to explain the 30% markup? Mercer's eyes narrowed. He didn't look panicked. He looked triumphant. You think you're a hero, Pendleton, the noble single dad riding in to save the Ice Queen. But you're out of your depth. Mercer reached into his jacket pocket and tossed a thick manila envelope onto Romano's desk. It landed with a heavy slap. What is this? Romano demanded. That, Mercer sneered, is a copy of an offshore wire transfer authorized at 9 a.m. this morning from the Bainbridge project budget. $2 million routed straight to a Cayman's account. The authorization signature matches yours perfectly, Romano. Romano's blood ran ice cold. I didn't sign anything today. No, you didn't, Mercer smiled, a terrifying, predatory grin. But the digital footprint traces back to your IP address. The compliance officers are reviewing it right now. By 5 p.m., they are going to present this to the board of directors. Claire Montgomery's hand-picked golden boy caught embezzling $2 million on his second day. The board will vote her out by Monday for gross negligence. And you. Well, Mercer leaned in close, smelling of expensive cologne and peppermint. You'll be going to federal prison, Romano. I wonder what the state will do with little Lily when you're gone. Romano lunged across the desk, grabbing Mercer by the lapels of his suit and slamming him back against the glass wall. The blinds rattled violently. If you ever mention my daughter's name again, I will break your jaw, Romano snarled, his fist raised. Mercer didn't flinch. He just laughed, a low, wet sound. Hit me. Do it. Add assault to the fraud charges. The police are already on their way, Pendleton. Welcome to the big leagues. Pendleton's hands shook with white-hot rage, but the analytical, structural part of his brain, the part that had spent a decade designing load-bearing pillars and stress-testing steel, took over. Violence was a collapsing foundation. If he struck Derek Mercer, he would be playing exactly the role the vice president had scripted for him. The desperate, erratic, violent blue-collar worker who snapped. Pendleton slowly uncurled his fingers from Mercer's expensive lapels. He took a deliberate step back, smoothing his own frayed tie. The police, Pendleton said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Right. Well, you'd better go greet them in the lobby, Derek. I wouldn't want to keep them waiting. Mercer scoffed, straightening his suit jacket with a look of profound disgust. Enjoy the view while it lasts, Pendleton. You have 30 minutes before security drags you out of here in handcuffs. He turned on his heel and strode out of the office, leaving the door wide open. The moment Mercer's footsteps faded down the carpeted hallway, Pendleton slammed the heavy glass door shut and locked it. He closed the blinds on the remaining interior windows. He was completely isolated. He looked at the manila envelope sitting on his desk. The wire transfer, $2 million routed to a Grand Cayman offshore account, complete with his digital signature and an IP address log tracing directly to this very office terminal. It was a flawless frame-up, designed by someone who understood corporate bureaucracy intimately. But Pendleton was an engineer. He knew that every flawless structure had a stress point. He sat down at his computer, his eyes scanning the metadata on the printed sheet. Authorization timestamp, 9/4 a.m. Date, Friday. Pendleton closed his eyes, mapping out his exact physical coordinates at 9:4 a.m. that morning. He hadn't been on the 40th floor. He hadn't even logged into the company intranet yet. At 9:04 a.m., he had been sitting in the Human Resources Department on the 12th floor, physically filling out a paper I-9 form and having his biometric fingerprints scanned by a compliance officer named Catherine Lewis. He grabbed the desktop phone, bypassing the executive directory, and dialed the 50th floor directly. It rang twice before the CEO's assistant picked up. Executive office. I need to speak to Claire Montgomery right now, Pendleton said. It is a matter of corporate survival. There was a brief pause. Hold, please. A click, and then Claire's voice, sharp and laced with tension. Pendleton, I was just about to call you. The compliance department just flagged a massive anomaly originating from your terminal. I have the board of directors demanding an emergency assembly at 5 o'clock. What the hell is going on? Mercer just sprang the trap, Pendleton said rapidly. He faked a wire transfer of $2 million to frame me for the Bainbridge embezzlement. He's using it as the catalyst to demand a vote of no confidence against you for hiring me. He said he already called the police. I can halt the police at the lobby, Claire said, her tone shifting from accusatory to absolute tactical precision, but I can't stop the board meeting. If the digital footprint points to you, I can't protect you, and I will lose the company. Do you have a defense? I do, but I need your security clearance to prove it. I'm coming up. Pendleton didn't wait for the elevators, knowing Mercer might have already requested a lockdown on his keycard. He sprinted to the emergency stairwell, taking the concrete steps 2 at a time, his lungs burning as he climbed 10 flights to the 50th floor. When he burst through the heavy fire doors, Claire was waiting in the corridor. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, leading him straight into her private war room, a secondary office walled with digital smartboards. Show me the flaw, Claire demanded, crossing her arms. The timestamp on the transfer is 9:04 a.m., Pendleton said, booting up one of the smartboards. I was in HR on the 12th floor at that exact minute. My biometric scan for my ID badge was logged at 9:06 a.m. You can pull the HR timestamp to prove I wasn't at my desk. That proves you weren't physically there, Claire noted, pulling up the King County server logs on her tablet. But it doesn't prove Mercer is the thief. The board will just argue you gave your login credentials to an accomplice. That's why I looked deeper into the Bainbridge blueprints, Pendleton said, his eyes gleaming with the sharp intensity of a man in his element. He tapped the screen, bringing up the master material logs for the waterfront project. Mercer isn't just a thief. He's a sloppy project manager. Look at the concrete requisition forms for the foundational pylons. Claire leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the technical data. He ordered high-density, titanium-reinforced rebar and Class A seismic concrete. We're building in a fault zone. That's standard protocol. It's standard for King County Zone 4, Pendleton corrected, pointing to a geological survey map of the Puget Sound he had overlaid on the screen. But the Bainbridge waterfront sits on a deep bed of compacted glacial till and solid basalt bedrock. The Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections only requires Zone 3 standard reinforcement for that specific parcel. The difference in material cost between Zone 3 and Zone 4 for a project this size is exactly $2.4 million. Claire's eyes widened as the realization hit her. He budgeted for the expensive Zone 4 materials to justify the massive corporate payout. But he actually purchased the cheaper Zone 3 materials, Pendleton finished. I checked the delivery manifests at the loading docks from yesterday. Standard rebar. Standard concrete. He pocketed the difference through a shell company called Pacific Coast Concrete, based in Delaware. And I know how to tie that company directly to him. How? I looked up the registered agent for the LLC in the Delaware State Registry. It points to a physical mailing address, 400 Broad Street, Penthouse B, Seattle. Pendleton smiled grimly. 3 years ago, I drafted the HVAC retrofits for that exact building. It's an exclusive co-op. You can't register a business there unless you own the unit. Claire didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, accessing property tax records. Within seconds, a deed appeared on the screen. The penthouse was registered to a trust in the name of Eleanor Mercer, Derek's wife. Checkmate, Claire whispered. She looked up at Pendleton, her icy demeanor giving way to a look of profound respect. You didn't just find the leak, Pendleton. You blew the whole dam wide open. What time is the board meeting? Pendleton asked, checking his watch. 15 minutes, Claire said, reaching for her desk phone. I need to make a call to the FBI field office at the Jackson Federal Building. We aren't just firing Mercer, we're burying him. The atmosphere inside the 48th floor executive boardroom was suffocatingly tense. The sprawling mahogany table was surrounded by 12 members of the Montgomery Holdings Board of Directors, mostly older men in bespoke suits, who had spent the last 2 years actively trying to dismantle Claire's grandfather's legacy for quick quarterly profits. At the far end of the table sat Derek Mercer, looking grave, holding a thick dossier of evidence. Next to him sat a guest. It was the man from the coffee shop Keaton, the loudmouth hedge fund manager. Pendleton, observing through the frosted glass of the anteroom, felt a cold knot of realization tighten in his chest. Keaton wasn't just a random bully. His firm, Vanguard Capital, was the activist investor group trying to stage a hostile takeover of Montgomery Holdings. Mercer had been sabotaging the budget from the inside to tank the stock price, allowing Keaton to buy up controlling shares for pennies. This is a tragedy of leadership, Mercer was saying, his voice echoing in the grand room. Claire Montgomery bypassed all standard executive vetting to hire an unemployed, bankrupt contractor simply because of a personal whim. And within 48 hours, he has embezzled $2 million of shareholder capital. The Seattle police are downstairs. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence to remove Miss Montgomery as CEO. I second the motion, Keaton said smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. Before the board chairman could call the vote, the heavy double doors swung open. Claire Montgomery walked in, radiating a chilling, absolute authority. Pendleton walked half a step behind her, his posture straight, his eyes locked dead onto Mercer. A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. Miss Montgomery, this man is a criminal suspect, the chairman barked. Security should have detained him. Security works for me, Charles, Claire said, taking her place at the head of the table. She didn't sit down. She placed a sleek black folder on the mahogany wood, and Mr. Pendleton isn't a suspect. He is the man who just saved this company from the most pathetic attempt at corporate espionage I have ever witnessed. Mercer stood up, his face flushing red. This is a desperate deflection. We have the IP logs! The wire transfer came from his office! At 9:04 a.m., Pendleton spoke up, his deep, steady voice cutting through the noise. He tossed a certified King County Human Resources printout onto the table. At 9:04 a.m., I was on the 12th floor having my biometric fingerprints registered by Catherine Lewis in compliance. The terminal in my office was accessed remotely by your executive assistant, Derek. We have the IT security footage of her entering my empty office with a flash drive at exactly 9:02 a.m. Mercer blanched, the color draining from his face, but he tried to pivot. My assistant went rogue? That's your defense? You still authorize the fake concrete contracts! Actually, Pendleton said, stepping forward, shedding the last remnants of the beaten-down single father and fully embracing the brilliant architect he was meant to be. You authorized the concrete contracts, Derek. 3 weeks ago. You budgeted for Zone 4 seismic materials, but you ordered standard Zone 3. You pocketed the $2.4 million differential through a shell company called Pacific Coast Concrete. That's a lie! Mercer shouted, panic finally cracking his polished veneer. You have absolutely no proof to connect me to that LLC. Claire smiled, a terrifying, predatory curve of her lips. She opened the black folder and slid a copy of a property deed down the length of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Keaton. Pacific Coast Concrete is registered to Penthouse B at 400 Broad Street, Claire announced to the silent room, a property owned entirely by Eleanor Mercer, your wife, Derek. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Board members shouted, pointing fingers. Keaton stood up, his face purple with rage, realizing his insider asset had just completely unraveled. You incompetent fool, Keaton hissed at Mercer, stepping away from him as if he were radioactive. Keaton turned to the board. Vanguard Capital had no knowledge of this embezzlement. We withdraw our support for Mr. Mercer immediately. Sit down, Keaton, Pendleton commanded, his voice booming with the exact same authority he had used in the coffee shop days earlier. Keaton froze, truly looking at Pendleton for the first time. Recognition flashed in the hedge fund manager's eyes, followed instantly by a wave of cold terror. You, Keaton whispered. Me, Pendleton said softly. You like to shout at tired women in coffee shops when you think they have no power. You like to manipulate stock prices and ruin people's livelihoods from behind glass walls. But your shell company didn't just list Mercer's wife's condo as a mailing address. The initial seed funding for Pacific Coast Concrete came from a Vanguard Capital subsidiary account. You bankrolled the embezzlement. Claire checked her watch. The men in suits waiting in the lobby aren't the Seattle Police Department, Derek. They are agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division, courtesy of the Jackson Federal Building. They have warrants for both of you for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and embezzlement. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. 4 federal agents stepped into the room, their expressions grim and strictly business. Mercer collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, completely broken. Keaton tried to push past the agents, spouting threats of lawsuits and high-priced lawyers, but he was swiftly handcuffed, his designer Brioni suit twisting awkwardly around his wrists. As they dragged Keaton past the head of the table, Pendleton leaned in just slightly. Looks like you're going to need a new suit, Richard, he whispered. Silence fell over the boardroom as the doors closed, leaving the remaining board members staring in stunned awe at their CEO and her new project manager. The vote of no confidence has been tabled indefinitely, Claire said calmly, taking her seat at the head of the table. She looked at the remaining men. Now, if anyone else has a problem with my leadership or my choice in executive hires, you are welcome to resign. Otherwise, we have a waterfront to build. Nobody moved a muscle. That evening, Pendleton walked out of the Montgomery Tower and into the crisp, clear Seattle evening. The rain had finally stopped. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a notification from Chase Bank. Direct deposit received. Montgomery Holdings, LLC. Available balance. $20,012.45. His signing bonus, he smiled, looking up at the clearing sky. He didn't just have his dignity back. He had his future. He walked toward the subway, eager to get back to Ballard, eager to hold Lily, and eager to tell her that they were never, ever going to be afraid again. If you enjoyed this intense story of a desperate single father turning the tables on corrupt billionaires and proving that true integrity always wins, don't forget to hit that like button. We bring you thrilling, real-life drama and poetic justice every single week. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next incredible story. See you next time.
Hi, my name is Hidden Princess, the owner and manager of Hidden Princess. After watching the video, a single dad stood up for a woman at a coffee shop. He had no idea she was a billionaire. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the simple act of kindness at the beginning. A father who had so little still chose to help someone else without expecting anything in return. Even though this is a fictional story, it's a reminder that the way we treat people can leave a lasting impression in ways we never expect. Which moment stood out to you the most? And do you think you would have stepped in if you had been there? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story meant something to you, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.